Alrighty, students, welcome to the lecture on the male reproductive anatomy. So we're going to start with the scrotum and the testes, since the testes are kind of the primary male sex organ where the sperm are made and the sex hormones produced. The testes themselves hang outside of the body cavity, encased in the scrotum, which is essentially a sac of skin and tissue that surrounds the testes and hold them outside the body cavity. Our core body temperature is about 37 degrees Celsius. That is too warm for the testes to make sperm properly. They need it about 3 degrees cooler, and by hanging outside of the abdominal cavity rather than all internal in the abdominal cavity, the testes are able to achieve that slightly lower body temperature. The position of the scrotum is controlled by the cremaster muscle here. It helps kind of hold the scrotum in place in their kind of proper position outside the abdominal cavity. However, when it gets particularly cold outside, we don't want to get the sperm, the testes to be too cold, right? We need it just a little bit cooler than body temperature, not a lot cooler than body temperature. Then the cremaster muscle will actually contract more, and that will pull the scrotum much more snugly up against the body and the kind of bottom half of the abdominal cavity there, and so that the testes can remain at their proper temperature. In terms of blood supply to the testes, we are talking primarily about the testicular artery, which delivers the blood to the testes. The testicular artery branches directly off of the abdominal aorta, travels from the abdominal aorta down through what is known as the spermatic cord, which is essentially a connective tissue wrapping around the blood vessels and the nerves and the lymphatic vessels, traveling out to the two testes. Draining the blood from the testes is this pampiform venous plexus. A plexus is essentially a fancy word for a network. So it's this network of little venous blood vessels. Venous blood is cooler, especially venous blood that's been hanging out in the testes outside the body cavity. Conversely, the blood coming from the testicular artery is much warmer, right? Because it's coming from that abdominal aorta, so it's more nice and toasty inside of the body. And it's, again, too warm for our testes. So the venous plexus that kind of wraps around the testicular artery, and it's almost like a heat exchange, right? So the testicular artery is bringing nice warm blood down to the testes, and the venous plexus is draining cooler blood from the testes and kind of bringing it up, and they exchange some of that heat. So the venous blood vessels absorb some of the heat from the testicular arteries, so that the blood delivery to the testes is not overly warm, which helps keep the testes cool, which again is necessary for sperm to be produced properly. This is what a testis looks like. You'll see, in addition to being encased in the scrotum, there are actually two kind of connective tissue membranes surrounding each testis. The outer layer, which is derived from the peritoneum that surrounds all of the abdominal organs, is known as the tunica vaginalis. Then there's a little tiny space. And then we have the tunica albuginea, which is a kind of fibrous connective tissue membrane, little capsule that encapsulates the lobules. So each testis is divided into about 250 lobules, like you see here. And inside the lobule, you find 1 to 4 seminiferous tubules. And the seminiferous tubules is where sperm production takes place. So sperm are made out here in the seminiferous tubules. From the seminiferous tubules, the sperm then move into the straight tubule here, then into the reedy testis, and then into these efferent ductules, and then finally into the male duct system, which begins with the epididymis here. So the duct system takes the sperm from the testes and delivers it outside of the body. The first part of the duct system is the epididymis. So that's this structure here. And then we move into the Ductus Deferens or the vas deferens, then into the ejaculatory duct, and then finally the urethra. So I'm going to go back for a second. So the epididymis has three parts. The first part is the head of the epididymis, and then the body of the epididymis, and then finally the tail of the epididymis. And when the sperm first enter the epididymis, they are non-motile. They don't have their flagella yet. They can't swim, and they're not kind of fully mature yet. As they kind of slowly move through the epididymis, it takes about 20 days or so, the sperm will mature, gain their ability to be motile by having their flagella, and then they will essentially kind of hang out in the tail of the epididymis until ejaculation. And then when ejaculation occurs, there's muscles in the epididymis and it contracts, and the sperm is then propelled into the Ductus Deferens. So we follow the Ductus Deferens, come up from the testis into this larger portion here, kind of on the kind of posterior side of the bladder. Then we're looking at the back of the bladder here. You can see we have this larger kind of ampulla, which is kind of the last part of the Ductus Deferens, and then the duct of the Ductus Deferens joins with the duct from the seminal vesicles to make that ejaculatory duct, and then the ejaculatory duct then leads into the urethra. Now there's smooth muscle all in the walls of the Ductus Deferens, and when the epididymis contracts, that ejects the sperm into the Ductus Deferens. The smooth muscle in the walls of the Ductus Deferens helps keep propelling that sperm through all the parts of the Ductus Deferens into the ejaculatory duct, into finally the urethra. The urethra itself has three parts. There is the portion that is kind of surrounded by the prostate. That is the prostatic urethra. Then there's this very small portion kind of at the wall of the pelvic floor, which is called the intermediate part of the urethra. It's essentially the middle part of the urethra. And then the urethra that travels through the penis is known as the spongy urethra. Now, the urethra, of course, is also part of the urinary system. So this is one of those differences between males and females. In females, the urethra only carries urine, but in males, the urethra carries urine as part of the urinary system, but also carries semen as part of the reproductive system. So it's a little bit different. If we look at the penis itself, we are talking about the copulatory organ of the male system. It consists of the root of the penis here, which has these kind of rounded bulbs, and then also the kind of almost look like wings that are the crus of the penis. And then finally we are into the shaft or the body of the penis, and then ultimately the head of the penis is the glans penis. Internally in the penis, what we are looking at is a network of connective tissue, smooth muscle, blood vessels that we refer to as erectile tissue. And it's actually little three cylindrical bodies. The corpus spongiosum surrounds the urethra. It's what then expands to make the bulb of the penis here. And then the kind of more posteriorly, we've got the Corpora Cavernosa. And again, you can see this is full of this erectile tissue. You'll also see some deep arteries inside the Corpora Cavernosa, and then some more blood vessels and nerves kind of posteriorly located in the penis. Now, when an erection occurs, all of this erectile tissue essentially gets engorged with blood, which then causes the penis itself to get bigger and to become stiff and rigid, because it's essentially just filling, all this erectile tissue is just filling with blood. In terms of our accessory glands, this is what's going to combine with the sperm to make what is actually known as semen, the fluid that comes out. It's not just sperm. There are 3 accessory glands that contribute to all of this. We have the seminal vesicles here, which contribute the bulk of the fluid of the semen. It's about 70%. It's known as seminal fluid. It's got things like fructose in it and prostaglandins. It's got antimicrobial properties, all kinds of stuff in there. The duct of the seminal vesicle joins with the Ductus Deferens to make that ejaculatory duct, pushes the semen into the urethra. The prostate itself here is this kind of walnut-sized organ, kind of wraps around the urethra. It secretes a slightly acidic fluid, a little milky. It's about 30% of the volume of our semen. And then the bulbourethral glands sit kind of at the pelvic floor area, just underneath the prostate. They're very, very, very tiny, about pea-sized, and they create this kind of clear, thick mucus that helps lubricate the gland's penis during sexual arousal, as well as neutralize some of the acidic traces of the urine left from the urethra. So if you'll recall from the urinary system, our urine is slightly acidic, 6.5 typically. We want to neutralize that, even though the urine and the semen don't move through the urethra at the same time. There are still kind of lingering traces of that acidic urine in the urethra, and some of the accessory gland fluids, such as from the bulbourethral glands, help neutralize some of the bit of acid. Prostates, in addition to producing this kind of slightly acidic fluid, they also produce a protein called prostate-specific antigen, PSA antigen. And if you've ever known anybody who's ever, any male in your life who's worried about prostate cancer, they'll do a PSA test. And it's one of the ways that they can look at if the prostate is potentially cancerous, although I do have to warn you that sometimes you get a false positive, and then they'll usually do more tests. But if you know any male in your life who is older, they will probably have a PSA test at some point, because prostate cancer is not uncommon amongst older men. Semen itself is the mixture of the sperm and the accessory gland secretions. It's kind of a milky white color. Typically, 2 to 5 milliliters is secreted during each ejaculation, and you'll find anywhere between 20 and 150 million sperm per milliliter of semen. So there's quite a lot of those little swimmers inside the semen. So we've got all of the accessory gland secretions. So we've got things like citric acids in the seminal fluid. There's fructose from the prostate and from the seminal vesicles, so that the semen have lots of sugar to make ATP so that they can have energy. Because remember, they've got a long swim, essentially. They've got a long journey to get to an egg. There are prostaglandins in the seminal fluid. There is a kind of a mucousy plug in a female cervix, and in order for the sperm to reach the egg, they have to get past that kind of mucousy plug. And so the prostaglandins in the seminal fluid help decrease some of that viscosity, make it a little easier for the sperm to make it into the uterus so that they can continue to swim to make the egg. Typically, peristalsis in the uterus is in a kind of singular direction, pushing stuff out of the female uterus, but the sperm are trying to get up the uterus, and so the prostaglandins help stimulate some of that reverse peristalsis, make it a little bit easier for the sperm to make their way through the uterus. There are also chemicals that enhance the motility of the sperm, including its slightly basic nature. And then there are also clotting factors. Initially, semen is somewhat coagulated, a little more viscous, so that it doesn't all kind of leak out. And then it is, they do a little fibrinolysis, and the semen gets completely liquefied, so that the sperm can kind of finish their swim. There are also some antimicrobial properties to our semen, help tamp down on some bacterial growth. Now, essentially what copulation is the injection of male sex cells into the female body. Well, so those male sex cells are going to have different MHC proteins, right? Different antigens than the female body. And so that could theoretically provoke an immune response from the female body because the sperm cells are non-self cells. But there are some chemicals in the semen that help suppress some of that immune response from the female. As I mentioned, it is a slightly alkaline fluid, semen. Again, we want to kind of neutralize some of the acidity from the sperm the sperm from the urine in the urethra of the male, and then also the female vagina itself is slightly acidic, and so the acid is not super great for the sperm, and so we need the semen to be slightly alkaline to help neutralize some of that acid. So if we take a look at the male reproductive system kind of in whole, you can see here is our testis, where we're going to make our sperm. From the testis, we're going to go into the epididymis, then into the Ductus Deferens, into then the ejaculatory duct, into the urethra, and then out the penis here. You can see the three parts to the urethra: the prostatic urethra here with the prostate around it, the intermediate part of the urethra here, and then finally the spongy urethra moving through the penis. You can see the corpus cavernosum of the penis, as well as those more posterior corpus spongiosums. You'll also see our different glands. Here on the posterior side of the bladder, we've got the seminal vesicles, again, the prostate, and then those little tiny bulbal urethral glands. And that is the reproductive anatomy of the male reproductive system.